Hey, this is Silas. About to go to a meetup. It's a philosophy group or some discussion group where they're discussing what is evolution. And as I said with a lot of my videos, I've been trying to find out the question behind things. I actually want to create a video where I say, what is the question of life? What is the meaning of life? They normally say, what is the meaning of life? And they're like, okay, looking for the answer, looking for the question. But I think that question in itself, what is it? And I have this thought that things like George Soros and certain political challengers or mucker-uppers or just issues that are going on in society today are actually forces of evolution. I mean, how else are people going to evolve? Loud train is 16 down. Just 1 second. A little bit loud. Okay. You see, like right there, just the train coming down, it makes you change what you're doing. You gotta adjust what you're doing. So let's say I was in a completely silent place, just in a silent room by myself. I could just make videos without needing to pause, without needing to adjust, without needing to think like, okay, what could happen if I'm recording right now? Should I take some time to record first, or should I wait till the train passes, or the train's taking off again? But it goes off a little quieter than it comes in. But see, that itself, I think, is something that makes you think what's going to happen and makes you adjust. And that's what I think evolution is. And at least it's a part of it. So yeah, this talk is going to be in a meetup group. It's about actually discussing things with Darwin, the history and stuff about that. Because I think that's another problem. A lot of people don't really understand evolution. And it's a basic thing in society, so, I mean, in humanity, in life. So I'm looking forward to this interview. This discussion. I'll record more after. And yeah, off to the interview now. Train's coming. This is the day after I went to the Meetup. Meetup is still a good app. You can still find really good things on there. I know I did that resist video, the virtue signaling that they did shortly after the election of Donald Trump, but that's just neither here nor there. Okay, so this was a talk about evolution. It was, the person running it said that there was a lot more people than expected, than they usually are. There's about 40 people there. And he was talking a lot more because for this particular subject, he was kind of guiding us through it, or he made these points. I'm going to go through some of the points and some of the notes I took and just talk about some of the things. And the picture that goes along with it is a couple of pictures that I drew when I was there. One is supposedly Charles Darwin. And I think this is a fitting picture for kind of my general takeaway from this event. Was I went there, and some of the things I heard were things that I knew before. Learned some new things. It was also good to see it in that sense, just have the conversation and see what other people's take on this thing is. But one of the key things is memory. In my opinion, when you get certain information, how do you remember it? Like this picture of Charles Darwin that I drew while I was there. I was just kind of thinking, okay, this is kind of the image I have in my mind of Darwin. Now, is it exactly what Darwin looked like? No. I might actually check before I post this video up. I think it's just like old, white, wizened man type thing. It could be a couple of people that this person looks like, this thing I drew. And I think that's also how it works with some of these things like evolution and other forms of knowledge that we know. Do we actually have the accurate idea in our mind of what this thing is? Are we thinking something else? And another key point was, as expected, I wasn't too surprised that it came into a bash religion thing. And this was generally bashing religion, and I've been more of an anti-theist for a while. I was raised Christian, but came out of that, had some atheist time, had some anti-theist time. But this whole idea of just lumping in all religions into this sense, there's a really, really good podcast I just listened to a few days ago with Tom Woods and Stefan Molyneux talking about Christianity's part in science. Even in this talk, we were having this talk, and the man who was running it mentioned that the monks were some of the first ones who kind of pointed out, I think it was heredity. He was pointing out that in the past they used to think that when you have kids, the genes make kind of a half of who they are. It's like they're halfway between the man and the male and the female who have the kid. But then some monks apparently pointed out they were just sitting there, I guess, thinking, sitting and spending a lot of time just thinking about things. And then they looked and said, okay, look, if we have things that are halfway between the genes and it's not one gene wins over the other gene, then there would be a lot more hermaphrodites or a lot more people in the midst of the gender, but yet it's always male or female, I mean, in general. And that kind of showed that, yeah, there's actually, if there's two gene sets, if your mom, let's say, has blonde hair and your father has brunette hair, one of those genes normally wins out. I know, okay, hair might not be the perfect example since you can have like some dirty brunette, but I think you get what I mean here. Okay, so moving on to this, speaking about the gender thing again, some lady raised her hand, and of course the whole, not of course, but another kind of expected thing came up to show how much this whole gender fluidity thing has come. She's talking about how possibly people were wrong about the genders because now there's an ability to have people in more of a spectrum, and I think most of the group was like no, and there was a group, I think it was a very diverse group. There was people who looked like in their lower 20s. There was people who seemed to be in their 70s, male, female, different races, and it was a good group. I'm really excited to have found this meetup and plan on going back. Okay, so the first point in the agenda was that the agenda was evolution by natural selection. So talked about this chapter belongs to Darwin. That was the first point. I'm not see. I already forget exactly what that was, but he discussed how Darwin was a great integrator. How he kind of put together a lot of ideas and thought lines and theories and kind of put them into one source, put them into one collection, put them into one idea as the idea of the theory of evolution. And from then on, the things that came after kind of built off of that. And I think you see this a lot in history, and I think that's also how evolution itself works. I think it tries many different things, different adjustments. Somebody has a little taller, maybe somebody has a little longer fingers, a little more dexterous fingers, or somebody has a little more resistance to this kind of plant. And then once there's something that really works really well in a certain environment, that actual that actual gene set or that actual selection, that thing that has been selected for finally, kind of becomes the thing that reproduces so much more that everything else that comes after kind of builds off of that. It makes so much more sense to be this thing in this area than anything else that it's just ends up being a lot more of that thing. that, I realize that sentence probably made very little sense, but I'm going to keep going. So we also discussed how did the voyage of the Beagle change the view of the species, and he was just talking about how travel. Back in the past, people didn't travel that much. So now the fact that he was able to travel around, he was obsessed with beetles, and he was traveling around the world, and he could actually now see different places and see different things, and that gave people more information. And I think I might have mentioned this in a previous video, but I was having this discussion with somebody in Central Park, and we were looking at plants, and she was saying that, oh, it's people used to know all these plants. I was like, yeah, people knew these plants because they didn't really leave like a 150-mile area, so they knew all the plants that lived there. So now, when you're living in that way, and you're seeing all the animals that have been selected to live in your general area, it kind of follows for you to think that maybe there was a creator or there was something that just created animals that fit there. You don't really get into a situation where you see an animal that's completely alien to your environment and you think, okay, why would this ever develop? All the animals you see have developed in this environment that you stay in, so it looks like all these animals are perfectly adjusted for it. Not perfectly adjusted, but they're adjusted for it, so it's kind of easy for you to think that all these things kind of developed together. And in a way they did. But when you go out and you see, for example, you go out and you see an elephant for the first time, and you've lived in a place where maybe the biggest animal was, let's say, a goat. Okay, this is not quite geographically right. But if you see an elephant now you're thinking, why would this creature ever exist? Let's say you are from like a really cold climate and you see an animal that is fit for a warmer climate and you think, why would this possibly exist? Then you can kind of start seeing that, okay, look, maybe things adjust to their environment versus the environment and the things just being created together. Okay, so what lessons from geology did Darwin use? Now, this was what he was talking about with people thought the world was about 4,000 years old at that time, and with geology, they could kind of see that the effects of that were being witnessed today, like erosion, the effects of the sun, were something that had existed for millennia. So they could also now think if these effects had been existing on a human being, on a certain creature, on a certain plant for millennia, what would the changes be? And then with this also they found the transitionary species and things like that. And we were also discussing how Darwin considered Aristotle to be one of the best biologists or one of the people that had given the most to the field of biology before him. And these were religious people. And I know in some sense they were religious, or I don't know how religious you'd say they were, but some of them were also like, look, we are intelligent enough to know what the times are. If we just come out and say very full blown atheists, we might not be accepted. Or they were kind of just going along with it, like many people do today. Many people today claim to be religious, but hardly go to church or hardly actually practice any of their religions. And I think that's part of why when somebody sees somebody commit an act of terror or be very abusive to maybe a family member or a relative, and they claim their religion, the people say, okay, we're religious and we don't do that. So they kind of don't really get that there's different aspects of being religious. Being religious is not just across the board, and that might also be another evolution of how religions go. People might evolve through their religious experience. And that's one thing I'm also thinking of here. Is evolution only biology? Can society evolve? Can a person evolve in their life and not just epigenetically, which I tried to bring up, but we didn't really get into. I love the field of epigenetics. Not love, but I'm very interested in epigenetics and evolutionary psychology. But as I said, the topic here was evolution by natural selection, so we kind of tried to stick in topic. So Darwin's first formulation of evolution by natural selection was grandchildren are like their grandparents, which is heredity, the tendency to small changes, which is variation, and then the great fertility in proportion to the support of the parents, which is natural selection. Now, with the grandchildren, like grandparents, it's just seeing similar features, similar tendencies, similar behavioral patterns. Tendency for small change variation. This was mentioned to be one of the fields that changed the most since genetics, the field of genetics came by after this, and people started learning all the interesting effects there. But we were also discussing, okay, what was the general thought of it before? But then humans had been going through animal and plant husbandry for years before Darwin came through with this. People had been breeding dogs for years and years. We've been breeding dogs since I think the caveman times when we first domesticated the wolves, or at least we took the most docile wolves. And I think it kind of worked this way, where the wolves that decided to follow the human packs and lived closer to the human packs benefited from eating some of the scraps that the humans left. And eventually those wolves actually became part of the human packs, and they became more and more docile, and they also had more neotenous features, which great topic is neoteny, but they slowly bred away from their more feral wolves into dogs, and then now we have the countless different versions of dogs. That's very basic. You should look into that more somewhere else. Okay, with a great fertility in proportion to support of the parents. For me, I was wondering. Now, this is what I'm also wondering with my more political bent on certain things. Was great fertility in proportion to support of parents? Now, you look in this situation. You have single parent households in the West, in places where there's a welfare state, and they have higher fertility than people in your more traditional nuclear families where it's two parents together. And now you could also argue that some of these single parent households live in places where most of the extended family still lives in this community, so they might be more of a familial support system, whereas some of these more traditional nuclear family marriages where it's two people who got married at maybe in their 25s, but they don't have that many kids, they could possibly have moved away from where their extended family is, so they might not have as strong as familial support. But in this situation, I think great fertility in proportion of support of parents says nothing about biological parents. So in this situation, if somebody's adopted into a family, and the entire family is still there, still a great family, that person might have more children than somebody who may have a husband or a wife of 20 years, but they don't have an extended family around them. So they may have a lower fertility. So in this situation, the state can come in as a family. It's not the best kind of parent, but as I've made this the case for in a couple of videos, I do think people are married to the state. Males are competing with the state as the biggest alpha, and a lot of females are going for the state as the main alpha provider out there. Now, is this a good provider? Is this going to lead to happiness? No, but it does support people having more children. It does support the reproduction of certain people. Now, at the same point, I'm also thinking, look, is the perception of resources the same as actual resources? As in, if the state is giving you money from taxation, from debts, this is not actual resources. Fiat currency is not actual resources. It's not an actual banana. They may be borrowing from the future, but you're not actually getting the sustainability as someone else who's actually going out there and working in the more traditional sense and bringing back the bacon, as they say. So, in this situation, are the people who are actually aware that it's not actual resources the ones who are actually fitter to, I mean, are they actually more adjusted to the environment? And this is another thing that came up. The survival of the strongest came up. And again, I think it's survival of the fittest is still a good term because it says survival of the fittest. And this goes back to the thing I was talking about before. When you go to different areas and you see different animals are fitter to live in different areas. You know, they say that whole saying, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it's a very crappy fish. But fish are fit for water. Fish are not fit for trees. Just as humans, we are technically the fittest species on the planet because we've been able to adjust and live in different areas. Yet, we're not the fittest species to live in water because don't have gills and a lot of other reasons. So the next point was, why did Darwin call it origin of species? And we discussed the new species, intermediate species, and the new genus. So this was kind of defining what exactly was a species, trying to identify what a species was. And I think the general agreement was animals that can reproduce together are considered within a species, of a species. And then below that, that's when you go into like genus and other classifications. I need to actually go and memorize that. I think it's a good classification to have: the familia, species, genus. I can't actually think of all of them. There's an onomatopoeia to actually remember this that I need to actually get on, but that's for later. And they were talking about the intermediate species where they said, look, you have a situation where, let's say on a mountain, let's say you have two mountains and a valley. So one life form starts developing on one mountain, and then some of them move to the valley and they start changing genetically a bit. And then some of them move to the next mountain and they start changing further genetically. Now, after a couple 100,000 years, possibly a million years, the creatures on the mountain, I mean the life forms on mountain A, can reproduce with the life forms in valley B, in the valley. And the creatures on mountain B can reproduce with the creatures in the valley. So now you have this situation where the creatures on mountain B can reproduce with the creatures in the valley, and the creatures on mountain A are reproducing with the creatures in the valley. After some time, possibly the valley floods, and that ends up killing off all the creatures in the valley. Now at this point, a few million more years pass, or a few 100,000 years pass, evolution continues, and you get to the point where the creatures on mountain B can no longer reproduce with the creatures on mountain A, yet they still share the same ancestor. The last point we discussed was static taxonomy versus dynamic genealogical taxonomy. Now in the static one, this is kind of like saying, we understand this animal creates these three other animals which branch off into these four other animals, and that's static. I think that sticks that way. And with a dynamic one, that was saying that, okay, there might be a mix here, and then now if something happens, if we find a species that jumps in on maybe step three of that initial thing I discussed. Now we have to go back and change the entire taxonomy and see what follows after. As you may imagine, a dynamic taxonomy would be invaluable to a field like evolution, since we're constantly or regularly uncovering new evidence or new fossils or things like that. Another cool thing about fossils is this other video I saw about them finding a dinosaur that actually had its skin still on it. And that just made me think of how people in the past thought this was how people thought they were giants and dragons. Because you'd find this thing and you have no idea to either explain it, you had no really concept of how old the world was. So it was like, okay, this must have been some dragon or this must have been some. And from my background in art, getting to know the anatomy of creatures, it's interesting to see how different animals actually still have a similar anatomy to humans, like the bone structure, at least mammals do. Like if you're dressing an animal when you're cooking, you can kind of see, okay, this is a thigh bone. You can see where the muscles attach, and you can see like the pelvis. And so, yeah, it kind of makes sense to me, at least, why people could think, okay, they must have been giants. Or even just like a bear thing. You find a bear skeleton, but I digress. So that was a talk. After it, I ended up talking to a few people, ended up walking the street with one gentleman, and this is the thing I was thinking about. How do you get to know something? Is knowledge just memory? You know, if you know a lot of information, if you get a lot of information in you, and you can't remember what it is, for example, this onomatopoeia, I was thinking of the thing, of the literary effect where you take a list of things and to remember them, maybe you take the first letters of each of those things on the list to remember the order. Onomatopoeia is not that. I'm not sure what it is, could go online and look, and that's what I did. I looked and found out onomatopoeia was not what I was talking about. So now, the internet has all this information. It technically has more memory than I did in this situation. But if it can't call forward that information, is it intelligent? Does it have knowledge? Similar to me. If I knew what I was talking about here, but I couldn't actually call forward the actual name of it, but just the idea, do I still know what I'm talking about? Here's something else that interested me about this talk, why I went to this talk. What I'm trying to figure out here is evolution just biological? There were some claims made that humans haven't biologically changed that much in a long time. But you see things in generational situations. For example, with the Japanese. Due to changes in diet, the average height of the Japanese has grown about 2 inches. Then you have something like the Ashkenazi Jews. Due to probably the very real stressors that they were subjected to as a community during the wars and in Europe and such, the average IQ for Ashkenazi Jews has grown 30 points, which is 2 standard deviations, all in a matter of generations. So I'm going to touch on this video I did with the Cancel Sarsour protest, which I should mention that I was reading an article about some liberal celebrities who didn't really mention that much about the recent Coptic Christian massacre that occurred in Egypt, and Linda Sarsour was one of the more public liberal figures that actually did damn it, which I think was pretty good. But getting back to this was, what are the stressors? What is the point of evolution? Is evolution not to be better adjusted to living in a certain environment? So if you get to a situation where you're living in a bubble, living in a place where there's no challenges, where there's nothing actually to adjust to, you'll get indolent, you'll get lazy as a gene set. You'll stop evolving. So you look what happened with the Ashkenazi Jews. They were put under stressors and their IQ changed and made them, like now they technically have a higher average IQ. You see that it results in them getting far more resources. They still have a rather strong community, stick together. That communal environment is still there. So the genetic gene set of Ashkenazi Jews is still passed on, as is the culture itself. If you're looking at the culture if you look at the culture as a living creature, as a creature in itself, it's also evolving and it's also rather successful at passing itself on. And what are genes? Aren't genes just information, genetic information? Isn't this just a passing on of information? So if you're better at passing on information, isn't that
part of the main goal of evolution. Now, think about it this way. Who is more successful at passing on their genes? Who is more successful in evolution? Somebody who has 20 children from 20 different partners, doesn't ever really talk to them, doesn't spend a lot of time with these people, whether it's in a situation where this is a single parent having multiple males parent their child, or a male going around and impregnating multiple females, or you have a situation where it's a polygamous family where there's one male who has three wives and has maybe six, maybe has 10 kids per wife, doesn't spend that much time with each child. Are they very successful at evolution? Or if you have one or two kids, but you spend a lot of time passing on your ideas and your values and your thoughts and caring for this person, I think you have done far better a job at passing on your genetics, at passing on who you are, passing on the information that makes you a human being. This is even discounting the fact that the people who are reliant on welfare and fiat currency and just the appearance of resources are not really adjusted to reality. So if and when reality does come forward, and when they realize there are no resources, you'll be stuck there and you'll find out that you're not in the best position to actually continue your genetics. So now with those genetics, what is the result of that? For example, if someone is running, in Kenya there's one tribe, the Kalenjin tribe, that most of the long distance runners come from. We don't try to divorce those genetics, that ability to run, from the genetics of the Kalenjin. So why is it that we divorce the results like technology from the genetics of humans? The ability to have language, the ability to make computers, the ability to build roads, the ability to have literature, the ability to communicate in this way is a result of our genes. It is, in my opinion, part of our genetics, part of our evolution. This computers, the technology we create, is a part of humanity. You don't consider a beehive, the creation of a beehive, to be separate from the bee's evolution. It's part of it. So yes, the creation of a skyscraper is part and parcel of human evolution. So races exist. The ability to travel between continents is rather recent. But when we were still separated on different continents, you had a situation where Africans were still, when the Europeans got to Africa, they still found them living in one floor houses. Now, this was happening when Europe had the ability to have ocean liners to travel across the ocean. They had multiple story buildings. At the same point, there's different things such as they had mathematics, they had things like that. But you go to South America and people had the concept of zero, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they had, what was it, running water or um, plumbing systems that were more advanced than what they had in Europe in certain cities in South America. So this shows that even though physically there were certain changes, like different allergies, different susceptibility to different diseases, for example, the common cold, just the diseases that were brought over from Europe was part of the main reason that so many people in South America died. But it shows that there's also an evolution of what the brain does. The biological evolution had to exist to create a brain that could do all these things. So, in the sense that the biology defines what the brain can do, it's part of it. An ant will create an anthill. It's never going to have the biology, at least as it is. It does not have the biology to create a skyscraper. A beaver may be able to create a rather intricate dam, but it does not have the ability to create something like the Hoover Dam that not only stops water but provides energy and electricity for others. I think evolution is a very important thing that we need to know about as a general society. I think it would be better if more people knew about it, and I also think we should kind of break out its limits and see where else we can apply this. It's a process. I think it's what they said, the theory of evolution. I think that process is not only applied biologically. I think we can apply it to other fields, to other, not fields, field is not the right term, but to other areas of development. I think it's just an explanation of X is being tried in a certain environment. Different things are being tried. Whichever one works the best at that time seems to be the things that most people do. And then again, more people go. And the way Darwin was the integrator, I think that's how it works also. A lot of different things are tried. One thing becomes very good, and it's like all the people involved in that thing kind of focus on that thing, or it gets up all the resources. This becomes the most important thing. And then after a while, more things break out, and another big plateau or something comes, and then goes on to the next step. Okay, so thanks for listening to the video. A little jambled. It was a little longer than I thought it was going to be, but very interesting topic for me. It goes off against some of the more political topics I've been talking to of late. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. Like, share, and subscribe if you did. Any of your thoughts will be welcomed in the bottom. And till next time, bye. In addition, the de-evolution of drugs illustrations that you saw in there was something I came up with for an editorial piece back in high school, and then I redid with these different characters. Going to open a merchandise store soon, probably in the next week or so. That's going to be in there. You're going to be able to get those shirts and a few other things coming around the pipeline. Might as well make this somewhat lucrative because yay capitalism. But anyway, bye. Thanks for listening again. Uh, Check in again for the merchandise store. Buy some stuff. Bye.